Today we are going to be talking about notes and rests. In music, notes are timed sound and rests are timed silence. It is important to know the relationship between these different kinds of notes and rests in order to read music. We are first going to start by learning the different types of notes and their names, followed by the types of rests. This is a whole note. This is the largest note value we have, meaning it takes up the most time or space in the music. A whole note is just a note head that is not filled in. Here we see our whole note at the top of our note rhythm tree. We will get more into that later. These are half notes. A half note is half the value of a whole note. Notice that a half note looks like a whole note with an open note head, but with a stem. The stem can point up or down. Stem direction does not change the value of the note. Here on our rhythm tree, you can see that a whole note can be divided into two equal halves, or half notes. Remember, two halves make a whole. Next we have a quarter note. A quarter note is 1/4 or a fourth of a whole note. Notice that the quarter note looks like the half note, but the note head is filled in. Again, the stems can point up or down, but that does not change the value or the length of the note. Back at our rhythm tree, we see we've added quarter notes. Notice that the half note can be divided into two quarter notes, just like the whole note was divided into two half notes. 4 quarter notes can fit into one whole. Just like a fraction, 1/4, you need 4 to make a whole. Our next note is an eighth note. Notice it looks like a quarter note, but we've added something called a flag. The flag always points to the right side, whether the note stem is pointing up or down. Sometimes when we have more than one eighth note next to each other, we turn the flag into a beam. Notice that this is still two separate eighth notes because there are two note heads, but they are beamed together for ease of reading. Back at our rhythm tree, you can see that a quarter note can be divided into two eighth notes. There are 8 eighth notes in a whole note. Finally, we have a 16th note. Notice how similar it looks to an eighth note, but instead of one flag, we have two. Just like an eighth note, 16th notes can be beamed together for ease of reading, but instead of one beam, we have two to represent the two flags. Back at our rhythm tree, we have added 16th notes. Notice that the eighth note can be divided into two 16th notes. The quarter note can be divided into 4 16th notes, the half note divided into 8 16th notes, and the whole note can be divided into 16 16th notes. We could keep dividing and divide our 16th note into 2, which would be 32nd notes, and divide that into 2, which would be 64th notes. But for our purposes, we are going to stop at 16th notes. Next, we will move on to rests. Rests have the same name as notes, but rests are silent, and notes have sound. A whole rest takes up the same amount of space as a whole note, but a whole rest is silence, while a whole note is sound. A whole rest is a box that hangs below a line on the staff. Some people think it looks like a hole in the ground. Next, we'll move on to half rests. A half rest looks very similar to a whole rest, except the box sits on top of a line on the staff instead of hangs below. Here we see a quarter rest. Remember, a quarter rest takes up the same amount of space as a quarter note. It's just silent instead of sound. Here we see an eighth rest. Remember, an eighth note had one flag. On an eighth rest, you have one flag on the front. On the 16th rest, you can see that there are two flags that correspond with the two flags of a 16th note. Here we have the rhythm tree for rests. Just like the note rhythm tree, We start with the whole rest as it is our largest rest value. The whole rest can be divided into two half rests. Half rests can be divided into quarter rests. Quarter rests can be divided into two eighth rests, and two eighth rests can be divided into two 16th rests. Here you can see both the notes and rests next to each other. Remember that a note is sound and a rest is silent. A whole is our largest or longest value, while a 16th is the smallest or shortest. The relationship between notes and rests is one of the most important things we can learn while we are learning how to read music.